I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me and what answer I am to give to this complaint. The Lord's answer. Then the Lord replied, write down the revelation and make it plain on the tablets, so that a herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits on an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. See, the enemy is puffed up. His desires are not upright, but the righteous person will live by his faithfulness. Indeed, wine betrays him. He is arrogant and never at rest, because he is as greedy as the grave, and like death is never satisfied. He gathers to himself all the nations and takes captive all the peoples. Will not all of them taunt him with ridicule and scorn, saying, woe to him who piles up stolen goods and makes himself wealthy by extortion. How long must this go on? Will not your creditors suddenly arise? Will they not wake up and make you tumble? Then you will become their prey. Because you have plundered many nations, the peoples who are left will plunder you. For you have shed human blood. You have destroyed lands and cities and everyone in them. Woe to him who builds his house by unjust gain, setting his nest on high to escape the clutches of ruin. You have plundered the ruin of many peoples, shaming your own house and faulting your life. The stones of the wall will cry out, and the beams of the woodwork will echo it. Woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and establishes a town by injustice. Has not the Lord Almighty determined that people's labor is only fuel for the fire, that the nations exhaust themselves for nothing? For the earth will be filled with the knowledge and of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. Woe to him who gave strength to his neighbors, pouring it from the wineskin till they are drunk, so that he can gaze on their naked bodies. You will be filled with shame instead of glory. Now it is your turn. Drink and let your nakedness be exposed. The cup from the Lord's right hand is coming around to you, and disgrace will cover your glory. The violence you have done to Lebanon will overwhelm you, and your destruction of animals will terrify you. For you have shed human blood, you have destroyed lands and cities and everyone in them. Of what value is an idol carved by a craftsman, or an image that teaches lies? For the one who makes it trusts in their own creation. He makes idols that cannot speak. Woe to him who says to wood, come to life, or to lifeless stone, wake up. Can it give guidance? It is covered with gold and silver. There is no breath in it. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him.
Thanks so much. We're in the second of our series on the book of Habakkuk, and as usual, you'll find it helpful if you've got one of my outlines. It's got the text on one side and what I'm saying on the other. Why don't I pray to begin? May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, how do you cope when something goes wrong that you can't fix? You know, how do you cope with God when you pray and pray about a situation but nothing seems to change? How do you keep believing in God when there is clearly something that's not right and you even know that God does not like this thing, but he does not fix it? It might be personal. Let's say you've got a friend who's deserted you and no amount of your texts or phone calls seem to get answered. Perhaps you've apologised, you want to restore the relationship, but nothing you do works. And it seems no amount of your praying changes anything. It might be family. Let's say your parents are getting divorced or your daughter's getting divorced, and you don't want it. You know that God loves lifelong marriages, but no amount of your advice is acceptable, no amount of your encouragement seems to work. And you pray because you know that God supports marriages. And you pray, but they still get divorced. It might be national. You've seen the housing crisis. Friends and family members can't get into the market, and even rent is too expensive, and in the end they have to get a second job and have to move suburbs away from where they're used to living because of this housing crisis. And so you pray about the housing crisis in our country, and that's a good thing to pray about. But how does God change a government's mind? How does God bring about national change? How many times should I pray about it? How long should I wait for an answer? Or it might be global. The war in Ukraine is still going. Now there's even North Korean troops there. Nothing seems to change. I've prayed about that situation for 2 years. The war in the Middle East is still going. It seems to get worse. Around Jerusalem, the city of peace, there is anything but peace. There is death and destruction on every side. It's complex and messy, I know. And so you pray. Because surely God would want his city to be a place of peace. Do you know the name Jerusalem literally means the Lord will provide peace? But he doesn't. How do you cope when something, it might be personal or something family or something national or something global, is going wrong and no amount of your action fixes it, and it seems no amount of your prayers make any difference? How do you keep going with God? Well, Habakkuk, I think, can help. Now, remember where we are in the book of Habakkuk. It's around 609 BC, as Luke explained to us last week. Jehoiakim is the king in Judah, and he is a bad king. He is a bad king. The 10 northern tribes have already been obliterated some 100 years before, but now there is violence and evil in Judah and in Jerusalem under his reign. And in chapter 1, we heard, if you were here last week, that Habakkuk can't understand why God is not fixing this. But then God answers, well, check this out. I'm going to use even the Babylonians. Another nation is going to come and punish the people of Judah, which actually happens, if you know your history, in 596, 597 BC. But then Habakkuk has a second question of God. Hang on, God. How come you're using these treacherous Babylonians? Why are you going to use a people that are going to commit excessive violence and pull people up by nets? And so we get to the start of chapter 2, our chapter today, where if you've got my outline there, you can see I've got 4 responses to things we can't fix. 4 responses when it seems things are out of control. And the first response is that of watching and waiting. Look at verse 1 again. I'll stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me and what answer I am to give to this complaint. Now, most of you know I like fishing, and when I'm fishing out there on the bay, it involves a lot of watching and waiting. You hold the rod and you observe the tip Sometimes you wait 5 seconds. Sometimes you wait an hour. But there's not much else to do. You watch and you wait. Oh, you can move the boat perhaps if you like. But that's what happens. And when things are out of control, sometimes what we need to do is simply to watch and to wait. In that sense, watching and waiting expects an answer. Habakkuk expects that God will judge the Babylonians. In this context, watching and waiting is an expression of faith. It's not always easy. Some of us so want to fix things that we can't live with unresolved tension, unresolved conflict, or unresolved brokenness. We find it virtually impossible, don't we, sometimes, to watch and to wait. Watching and waiting, therefore, takes time. And therefore, it takes patience. Watching and waiting can be lonely. It involves suspending the frenetic attempts to fix things. It often needs quietness, needs perseverance. It implies being open to correction, and perhaps our ideas about what the other should do or about what God should do, indeed when God might do something, might not be right. Now, as an aside, this watching and waiting, this is not an excuse for being slack or for not doing something when you can do something about something. But when something is outside our control, when we don't know why God has acted, like my examples at the start, it may be an appropriate response to simply watch and wait. It's not an unfaithful response, because you still trust that God is there and that God is going to do the good. But it's living with the tension that it seems that God's timing and our timing might not be the same thing. So in quietness, we wait in the presence of God for the Almighty to act as He wills. And we keep our eyes open and we scan for the thing that God might do. One of the authors I like reading is a guy called Ken Follett. I've always got a novel on the go at any particular time. It's one of the ways I relax, having a novel to read. And I've read probably everything that Ken Follett's written. He writes what might be called historical fiction. That is, he writes about England in, say, the 13th century, about like the building of a cathedral. That's called the Pillars of the Earth. Or he writes about the start of, there's someone who's read it as well. There's a whole series around that. There's also written a great series about World War I and World War II. The first one's called Fall of Giants. But his books have real character from the time. So in a sense, while you're reading through a fictional set of eyes, you're also reading true history and you're learning history, and you can see what has happened in the past. It's a fun way of learning, I find. And our second response when things are out of control is to trust in our scriptures. In verse 2 and 3, Habakkuk is to write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets so that a herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. That is, the idea of Habakkuk writing it down is that it's fixed. It's saying God has got this. He will fix this. And Habakkuk can trust the answer. Indeed, he can get the answer ready to be shouted from the hilltops. And for us, one of the great benefits of living now is that we have the whole of the scriptures, where Christianity is set in its historical context. That is, God does not just act spiritually by speaking to our individual hearts. No, our God is a God who acts throughout history. Remember, he brought the people out of Egypt across the sea, written in the book of Exodus. Brought the people into the promised land, as written in Joshua. stabilised the people with kings in the temple in 1 and 2 Samuel and 1 and 2 Kings. He spoke to the people through various prophets at various times with various different kings, like Jehoiakim here. And he sends his son to be born in Bethlehem and to teach in Nazareth and to die in Jerusalem and rise on the third day. It's in the Gospels. And he established his church in the book of Acts. And he disciples his church throughout the letters in the New Testament. And one day he'll bring it all to an end, as we preached earlier in the year from the book of Revelation. It is written. It is fixed. And we have the benefit of hindsight, much more than Habakkuk did. We can look back through the history and read of God acting in history time and time and time again. Now, for the people at the actual time, like Habakkuk, or whenever the time happens to be, it might seem that God is inactive, perhaps even for hundreds of years. But as we see in the whole of the Scriptures, we see, in fact, that God has had a long-term historical plan and was going about instigating it. When you feel that God is not fixing something out of your control, go back again to the Scriptures. They are written for us, his people, so that we might know his thoughts and his actions. God has acted in history, and he will act again. Like that, the third response when things seem out of control is the response of faith. Now, the word of faith can be a bit misunderstood. Let me explain it a little bit. Faith is not like airy-fairy half-belief. Faith is solid trust. Faith is solid belief. It's where we don't see something concrete, but nevertheless we believe. Let me put it this way. It's like I have faith in my wife. Now, my wife over there, Joy, she goes to work Monday to Thursday. She says she's at work, and she says she's working hard. Now, I don't see her at work. I mean, she could be off having a tryst with some bloke, I don't know. But I have faith in her. I know her character. I have evidence. I talk about what she does when she comes home. I see the pay packet come in to the bank. I can even see where she probably is because I have Find My iPhone on my iPhone. Well, at least I know where her phone is. But do you see, even though it is incredibly likely that I'm believing the right thing, I still have to have faith. I still have to have trust because I do not see it Monday to Thursday. I don't stand over her shoulder and watch what she's doing. But it's a very reasonable thing to believe in, a very reasonable thing to have faith in. And Habakkuk's response should be to have faith in God. Verse 4, see, the enemy is puffed up, his desires are not upright, but the righteous person will live by his faithfulness. And even when things are going pear-shaped in our lives, we are called to live by faith, both in whom we believe in and how we respond. Peter puts it like this, writing to a suffering church in the New Testament. So then those who suffer according to God's will should commit themselves to their faithful Creator and continue to do good. You see, God does not often magically zap evil out of our broken world. And so we are forced back to putting our faith in him even when things are outside our control. But that faith is an eminently reasonable faith because we have seen his actions in the past. And even when something in our lives or our country or our world is broken, the gospel is still true. God really did send Jesus to be born and to live and to teach and to die and to rise again and is now ruling on his throne in heaven and will come again one day to judge the living and the dead. It's a totally reasonable thing to have our faith in, to trust in, to believe in. One of the things I try and trust in is our judges and our law courts. Now, I'm sure they don't get everything right. That's why we have an appeals process. But I try not to judge a person who has been charged guilty by my own thoughts before the judge has made their judgment or the jury has made their judgment. I might feel that the person is guilty because I've seen some report on the TV, but I never know all the facts, so I, in the end, trust the judges and I trust the law courts. I trust the juries. After all, I have no other system at my disposal. And our fourth response when things are out of control is to trust in God's judgments, to trust that he is a just judge and that he will right wrongs and call people to account. And that's the rest of chapter 2 of Habakkuk. And you can see, if you like, it's structured around a series of woes. Did you notice that in the reading? Woe, 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 as it goes on every 2 or 3 verses. In fact, there's a sense of natural justice in the way God has set up the world, isn't there? Verse 7 talks about, will not your creditors suddenly arise? And verse 8, the peoples who are left will plunder you. It's like that saying, isn't it? Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. God has set up this world so much so that all tyrants will fall in the end. When you think about it, death is a great leveller, isn't it? Vladimir Putin will die one day and his reign will be over. But the woes in the passage show us the kinds of things that God will judge. In verses 6 to 8, God will judge stealing. By the way, can I say, don't cheat on your tax. Don't commit insurance fraud. Don't take things that don't belong to you. I'm sure you don't, but God will hold you to account. In verses 8 to 11, God will judge those who built from unjust gain. And supermarkets should not artificially rise prices and then lower them again to make it look like you're getting a bargain when you aren't. God will judge that. In verses 12 to 13, God will judge violence, those who build a city by bloodshed. And Vladimir Putin better watch out. And leaders in the Middle East better watch out. And leaders in Myanmar or Sudan better watch out. Because God will hold all to account who commit violence. And in verses 15 to 18, God will judge immorality. In Habakkuk's day, that was getting people drunk so that there could be sexual immorality. Sounds a bit like some forms of clubbing today. And lastly, in verse 19, God will judge idolatry. Those who make images into God, those who put things in the place of God, those who make people or spouses or money or jobs or friends or sport take the place of God. And whether there is individual sin like stealing or immorality, or it's corporate sin like unjust gain or city or state violence or national violence, God will and can, in the end, judge all sin. And when we see something in our lives or our community or our nation or our world that is out of our control, is it not great to know that we have a just judge who will actually call all to account in the end? When we can't fix things, here are 4 responses we might have: to watch and to wait for God, to trust in the revelation of the Scriptures, to trust in God himself, and to trust that God is a just and righteous judge. You see, God's glory will win in the end, as we've just sung. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the water covers the seas. It's not human glory that will last, but God's. And I love how this chapter finishes, don't you? The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. God will win, and he will right all wrongs, and we stand before him in awe. I'm going to invite us to do that just now. So can I invite you please to stand? And we're going to stand in silence before our awesome God. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him.